Hello everyone, my name is Natalie Reynolds and I am founder and CEO of specialist negotiation firm Advantage Spring, and I'm also visiting professor of negotiation at Cass Business School, and I'm really pleased to be doing a little mini masterclass for the NED members. I have run a couple of sessions for members at the NED before, so great if you've seen me before, good to see you again. What I wanted to do is just provide you with really some thoughts and guidance on how to manage the negotiation process over the coming months. The skill of negotiation is going to be critical for people in terms of navigating a post-COVID-19 world, a post-Brexit world. The need to negotiate is going to be stronger than ever as we need to negotiate the new normal, whatever that might be. So what I'm going to do is provide you with 5 top tips for how to plan and prepare for any negotiation that you have. Now, before we begin, what I did want to do was just really dispel some myths about what makes a good negotiator. I think for many people, they confuse negotiation with bullying, or they confuse negotiation with being overly dominant. Negotiation is quite a subtle skill. It's one that requires us to understand our counterpart. It's one that requires us to recognise that we don't always make decisions from a position of fact or logic. Sometimes the numbers can absolutely work in your favour, but if you haven't correctly managed the people involved, if you haven't been able to understand them and their motivations, well, sometimes those numbers are irrelevant. So what I try and teach to all my corporate clients is a way of thinking about negotiation that's holistic, one that encourages us to think about both the process, so the numbers and the statistics and the facts, but also the people as well. So what I'm going to share with you is my 5-step method for brilliant negotiation. It's called the DEALS method, and the DEALS method is designed to provide us with a really simple and memorable framework for any negotiation we might find ourselves in. Now, DEALS is 5 steps, as I said, and it's discover, establish, ask, lead, and seal. Now, the DEALS method is as applicable to an informal conversation with a colleague about workload. It's applicable to a salary conversation, but it's also just as applicable to a very formal contractual negotiation, perhaps with a supplier or a client or potential client. So let's start with the D of the method, which is discover. And what we're saying there is long before you get anywhere near the negotiation, you should have discovered absolutely everything that might influence the negotiation. And for me, this is about going beyond the obvious. Yes, you need to discover who are the parties, what are the variables, but it's about the other stuff. The stuff around the edges that we may not have considered, that actually might be really influencing what people can agree to. So it might be things like, the political unrest in Hong Kong, for example, caused a lot of problems to my clients last year in terms of impacting their supply chains or ability to move stock around. It might be to do with, the post-COVID-19 restrictions. Is that impacting your ability to negotiate effectively? But it could just be things like, is the CEO of your counterpart about to move on? Will that impact what they can agree to? Have they just had a big scandal that's impacted their share price? Will that impact what they can agree to? So just think more broadly, what are the issues? What's going on around the edges? What's the bigger picture? So what's going on politically, economically, reputationally for all of the parties, including yourself? On that point, it's also worth saying that we should also be discovering things as if you were them as well. So don't just discover what matters to you, discover what the world looks like to them. So take a moment to ask yourself, who are they? What do they want? Why do they want it? 3 extremely important questions, which I always advise clients to come back to throughout the negotiation process. Because if you can establish who they are, what they want, and why they want it, you'll go a long way to getting a good result. The problem is that all too often, without realising it, our brains flip those questions and we end up just constantly going back to who am I, what do I want, and why do I want it? Now, of course, that's important too, but we do need to constantly be asking ourselves what the world looks like to them. Next up is E for establish. And the establish phase is basically about taking all of that discovery and refining it down into some usable boundaries. So you need to establish who is going to be involved, where is it going to take place, when is it going to take place, what currency are you going to be conducting the negotiation in, what escalation procedures will you put in place, what risk can you swallow. But it's also about establishing discipline. So making sure that everyone involved in that negotiation on your side is aware of all of those elements so that you're not contradicting each other throughout the process. The establish phase is also the part of the process where we can start to think about establishing where can I go to on every issue? What's my break point? So a break point is basically a worst case scenario. What's my break point on every single tradable variable? And then importantly, what do I think their breakpoints might be? And it's important that we start to think about that because the likelihood is they're never going to tell you up front, honestly, what their worst case scenario is, because obviously they don't want to end up at their worst case scenario, just as you don't want to end up at yours. So that's where the discovery is really important. You know, by knowing who they are, what they want and why they want it, you can establish perhaps more easily where they might be willing to go to on everything. Next up is A for ask, and this is everything to do with the development of, the receiving of, and the making of proposals. So a simple tip, don't just go in with your opening position and a rough idea of where you want to end up. You need to make sure you have got multiple proposals planned in advance so that you're not winging it. And you know what, you might not use all of those proposals in the way you've written them down, but at least you've got some kind of reference point or map that you could follow. Similarly, by having lots of proposals planned in advance, it allows you to kind of pick and choose different proposals based on what it is maybe they're telling you throughout the process of the negotiation. You know, if you've maybe developed a whole load of proposals that touch on timeframes and a whole load of proposals that touch on, say, pricing, if actually through the course of the negotiation you realise that they seem to be more interested in timeframes, you can then default to using those pre-planned proposals rather than ones that actually might sell you short and they're not that motivated by anyway. The other thing I would say in relation to the ask is thinking about anchoring. This age-old question of who should go first. Now, anchoring is something that I feel extraordinarily passionate about because so many people misunderstand this whole concept of who should go first. So many of us think, let the other side go first, because then you can understand what they might be willing to give you. Well, that is the wrong way of thinking about it. Because, of course, their first proposal to you is never going to be an indication of what they're ultimately willing to give you. What that first proposal from them is actually going to be is them testing you to see the best they can get you to agree to. So play around with going first. Because all the evidence tells us that actually if you can go first, there is a real kind of bias towards that first proposal because actually our brains then anchor to that first proposal and that then sets the context for the rest of that negotiation. Now, I don't have time in this video to try and convince you about anchoring, but what I would say is that the evidence on anchoring is overwhelming. There is not a single study from the last 50 years or so that tells us you gain any benefit by letting them go first. So many studies tell us that you will gain the benefit if you can go first. So just something to think about. Now, if you are interested in anchoring, there is a thought piece on anchoring that I've provided to the guys at the NED, and I'm sure they'll be able to distribute that to you. But I'd also recommend that you get hold of a book called Priceless, The Psychology of Value by William Poundstone, and it goes into a lot more detail about what anchoring is and how we can manage it and deal with it. Next up is L for lead. And this is about, during the negotiation, how can you lead the other side to an outcome that you want? And so this is about thinking about simple things like, how do I get my hands on the steering wheel? How do I steer this negotiation to the outcome that I want? And a very simple way, a very simple tip is, don't be afraid to be the person who gets the ball rolling. Don't be afraid to be the person who starts things off by saying, hi there, so obviously we're here to discuss the issue of revision of pricing, given what's going on in the world at the moment. Sometimes being that person who actually just addresses the issue straight up can put you in a great position to then more naturally then steer that conversation and engineer where you go next. And I say this because so many of my clients, even at very senior levels, they'll kind of sit back and let the other side kick things off or start things maybe out of politeness or uncertainty or whatever. I always think, we're all busy. I think there's absolutely no shame in acknowledging why you're there. Still do the politeness and the chit chat, but acknowledge why you're there. And that then gives you an absolute advantage to then naturally take that conversation to the next step. And then finally, we have S for seal the deal. A couple of things here. Firstly, I always say one of the best ways to seal the deal is to make sure that you are sealing a deal that is future-proofed. Make sure you build in clauses that deal with what if this goes wrong, what if the relationship sours, what if one of you moves on, what if things change. The point of doing a deal and shaking hands is often the point at which people are happy and elated. They don't really want to be thinking at that point about what will happen if things do go wrong. But actually, that's exactly the point that you should be thinking about that. Build it in now, be clear on what will happen so that, you know what, if things do go wrong, you've already got a framework in place. But actually what I want to think to you about is, or really get you to think about, is this idea of reaching a yes. So sealing the deal really is about getting a yes, right? But what you don't want is an immediate yes, because an immediate yes is often a sign that there was plenty more where that came from, that was very easy for them to agree to. Ironically, as negotiators, what we want to be hearing is the word no, because the word no is a sign that actually now you're negotiating, because anything after that is actually an exploration of what a deal could look like, rather than just the immediate yes, which is, oh, maybe I could have done better than that. Now, a bit of a tip here about resilience. Good negotiators, you know what? I think they're defined by how they respond to no. Because so many negotiators that I know, they crumble at rejection. They crumble at the word no. And it really knocks their confidence. So rather than being the negotiator who, when they hear the word no, responds by going, oh, right, sorry, okay, so what were you thinking then? Instead, be the negotiator who embraces no, who recognizes that is just the start. That's your invitation to ask further questions, be more creative, get your heads together, come up with something different. View no as the beginning rather than the end. And that's why I always end any advice with this. When life shuts a door, open it again. It's a door. That's how they work. In negotiations, people will try and close doors on you. They will tell you no. They will tell you that they can never agree to something. You know what? Your job as a negotiator is to go back and try and open that door again. That might be asking different questions, taking different people with you, maybe being a bit firmer or a bit more gentle. But you try and open that door again at least one more time. And a final point before I go. Obviously, we're in strange and unusual times at the moment. And as I said at the start, Brexit is still in the background. Major change economically is probably afoot. And obviously, we've got all the impact of COVID-19. And, when we start to get back to work in whatever form that might be, there's going to be a lot of things that need negotiating. And I'm a big believer that, there are going to be some difficult conversations ahead. And I think if you can get in the driver's seat, if you can be the person who acknowledges that difficulty, that will often go a long way to smoothing the path for what might be a challenging conversation. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that useful. So just as a quick reminder, the deals method is discover, establish, ask, lead, and seal. You can find out more about that approach and everything that we do at www.advantagespring.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter at ADVSpringCEO. So at ADVSpringCEO. Stay well, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you at the Ned Bar soon. Thanks. Bye.